Externalization of the Toxic Introject by Marie Coleman. A summary about borderline treatment technique. This paper introduces and advocates for a specific therapeutic technique called the externalization of the toxic introject for the treatment of borderline personality disorder. The central premise is that traditional, objective verbal interpretation often fails with these patients, who instead require a more active and provocative approach from the analyst. Limitations of classical interpretation for borderline cases. Strict adherence to classical interpretive techniques often leads to a stalemate, where the patient gains intellectual understanding but remains unable to alter their psychic patterns. This can degenerate into a repetition of childhood dynamics, fostering hostility and reinforcing resistance. Origin of borderline disturbances. Borderline disturbances are understood to arise from pre-Oedipal life experiences and involve the introjection of unhealthy object imago during this period. These introject imago become a nuclear part of the ego. The toxic introject, this refers to an internalized, unhealthy image or representation of a significant early object, typically a parent, which the patient has unconsciously incorporated into their own ego. This introject is often perceived as dumb, unreliable, dangerous and crazy case 1, or opulent and overpossessive case 2. The need for externalization. The core argument is that resistances stemming from an unhealthy introject cannot be resolved through objective, verbal interpretation alone, but that the unhealthy object imago must be felt again by the patient as an external object or force to enable him to develop a new response to the pathological ego nucleus. Method of externalization. The analyst deliberately takes on the characteristics of the patient's pathological introject. This involves verbal leveling. The analyst verbally applies the patient's own repressed self-accusations to themselves, e.g., I'm too dumb, I'm crazy, you are not good, a failure. Acting the part. The analyst may subtly or overtly embody traits or attitudes associated with the introject object. Dynamics of the procedure. Precipitation of volatile reaction. This technique precipitates a volatile reaction in the psyche of the borderline patient. Release of intrapsychic tension. The hostility previously directed internally against the unhealthy ego nucleus is now directed against the analyst as representative of the pathological ego nucleus. Strengthening of the healthy ego. By externalizing the introject, the healthy part of the patient's ego is strengthened as it mobilizes energy against a seemingly external enemy, allowing for conscious recognition, confrontation, and development of new responses. Deliberate evocation of projection. The analyst deliberately evoke projection as a therapeutic tool. The patient treats the pathological element as a token projection onto the analyst. Therapeutic outcomes. Sudden deepening of insight and great effectivity. Patients may later identify the session as a turning point. Allows for the expression of repressed impulses and prohibitions where rational interpretations fail. Leads to various alterations in the mental economy which eventuate in cure. Facilitates integration of previously fragmented aspects of the self, e.g., case 1's acceptance of her own crazy, unconscious, and femininity. Patient provocation. The paper highlights that patients, particularly borderline individuals, often provoke the analyst to adopt a similarly clarifying role, inducing the analyst to reveal the introject parental imago. This mirrors a child's process of provoking parents to reveal themselves for ego development. Qualification of therapeutic ethos. The author acknowledges that this technique is manipulative, insofar as it may precipitate a great deal of movement in the treatment situation. While it has an initial shocking or traumatizing effect, this outraged protest by the patient is often the birth cry of a healthy ego. Limitations and cautions. The technique cannot be used too freely to avoid the patient recognizing it as a mere technique. The analyst must judge whether the patient will actually, not almost, but actually, abandon treatment if the authoritarian figure is perceived as flawed. Cases with primitive type of superego formation, e.g., rudimentary oral superegos preoccupied with the prohibition against devouring the maternal breast, may preclude success, as deep transference hatred based on the toxic introject remains unresolved. 2. Most important ideas or facts. Core problem in borderline cases. Resistance patterns are tied to the introjection of unhealthy object imagos during the pre-Oedipal period, forming a nuclear part of the ego. Ineffectiveness of traditional interpretation, resistances which have become a nuclear part of the ego through introjection of an unhealthy object imago cannot be resolved through objective, verbal interpretation alone. The externalization principle, the unhealthy imago, must be felt again by the patient as an external object or force. Analyst's role. The analyst actively mirrors the pathological introject or verbally levels at himself the patient's own repressed self-accusation. Therapeutic mechanism. The technique mobilizes the cathexis ordinarily invested in the repression and control of this internal enemy and directs it against the analyst as representative of the pathological ego nucleus, strengthening the healthy ego. Resulting insight, the patient's outraged protest, is often the birth cry of a healthy ego, leading to deeper insight and the ability to confront previously repressed aspects of self. Case 1 example. The analyst's blunt statements, "I'm too dumb," and "of course I'm crazy," caused the patient, who had previously avoided acknowledging the psychotic element in her own personality, to openly sob and then realize the projection, leading to subsequent positive changes and the ability to talk about her fear of insanity. Case 2 example. The analyst's calm and encouraging tone, suggesting the patient find a marriage of convenience, mirrored the introject, opulent, and overpossessive mother imago, leading the patient to exclaim, "You're a bitch," and, significantly, experience her first full night's sleep in years. Case 3 example. The analyst's agreement with the patient's self-castigation, "You are quite right. You are not good, a failure. Give up," led to a tremendous movement in the analysis, with the patient later stating, "It's as if I was waiting for you to say exactly that." From then on, everything changed. Superego as a limiting factor. Patients with primitive type of superego formation, e.g., rudimentary, oral superegos, may not respond to this technique as their deep transference hatred based on the toxic introject remains unresolved. This briefing highlights Coleman's argument for a more active, even provocative, intervention style when treating borderline patients, specifically by externalizing and embodying their internal, toxic introjects, to facilitate a breakthrough in their therapeutic process.